Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into the weekly agricultural updates for June 7th, 2026. Whether you're tracking food inflation, driving agribusiness investments, or honestly just trying to figure out your own grocery bill, you're going to want to pay attention. Because right now, India's massive agricultural buffers are on a direct collision course with some incredibly severe seasonal stressors.
I want to kick things off with a quote that perfectly captures the tension we're unpacking today. The whole system is basically undergoing a massive stress test. We aren't just dealing with a weather problem here. It's this crazy matrix of climate extremes, geopolitical ripples from West Asia, and spiking input costs, all crashing into the critical kharif planting season at the exact same time.
Okay, here's our roadmap for today. We'll be covering weekly headlines, agroclimatic analysis, crop intelligence, input economics, market and policy signals, regional hotspots, systems interpretation, farmer-level implications, strategic outlook, and finally, actionable insights. Let's get right into it. Section 1, Weekly Headlines and Agroclimatic Analysis.
So 92%. That is the absolute crucial number to keep in your head right now. Even though the monsoon made an on-time arrival down in Kerala, the IMD is projecting a below-normal 92% to 90% of the long-period average for the season, and that's entirely driven by an evolving El Niño. For the core rain-fed belts across the country, this is a massive, blinking red flag for kharif output risk. And right as farmers are prepping their land, we're seeing this wild clash in input economics. On one side, fuel logistics are getting way more expensive. Diesel in Delhi was just effectively hiked to 95.2 rupees a liter. But on the other side, because of geopolitical fears over in West Asia, there is absolute panic buying of fertilizers happening. Between March and late May, urea sales jumped 10% and DAP completely skyrocketed by 39%.
Section 2, Crop Intelligence and Regional Hotspots.
When you look across the country, it's pretty staggering how different regions are battling completely different extremes all at once. Up in the northwest, fluctuating heat waves are threatening late-zaid crops. Meanwhile, in central India, they just suffered through 47-degree heat that absolutely devastated vegetable yields, and now they're bracing for heavy rains and the disease risks that come with them. Down in the South Peninsula, it's a totally different story, with consistent severe flood and landslide risks.
But despite all this crazy weather volatility, farmers are actually adapting to the signals. They're actively responding to diversification incentives. Summer pulses acreage is up to 15.47 lakh hectares, and summer oilseeds have climbed to 9.2 lakh hectares. And keep in mind, this is all sitting on top of a baseline context anchored by a record-breaking 2025 wheat harvest of 117.9 million tons.
Section 3, Input Economics and Market and Policy Signals. Now here is a really fascinating disconnect in the market right now. Globally, fertilizer prices are actually correcting. Urea dropped 32% over the last month to around $419 a ton. But Indian farmers? They aren't feeling that relief at all. Because domestic retail prices are strictly controlled, the farmer is instead just getting squeezed by those skyrocketing transport and diesel costs we talked about earlier. So if the farmer misses the global price drop, who is absorbing the shock of these supply chain disruptions? The government. To secure kharif stocks and route imports safely away from the Strait of Hormuz, the center expects the fertilizer subsidy bill to surge by an astonishing 70,000 crore rupees for FY27. That is a massive fiscal jump. In response to this El Niño threat, policy has sharply pivoted towards de-risking this season. The center is pushing a month-long Save the Fields advisory campaign. They're mapping out vulnerable districts for less water-intensive crops, and they're organizing targeted seed provisioning just in case primary crops fail. Section 4, Systems Interpretation. Structurally speaking, India has built a pretty incredible safety net. Just look at the 2025/26 records. Over 230 million tons of rice and nearly 118 million tons of wheat. This robust, historic output is basically our primary buffer. It's what protects the system against immediate food shortages, even if the monsoon completely underperforms. But, and this is a big but, we cannot ignore the hidden risks lurking under the surface. Forecasters are warning of a potential second-half monsoon failure in August and September, which would hit late-sown crops incredibly hard. We've got the fiscal overstretch from those ballooning subsidies, and perhaps most concerning is the stress on crop insurance. Extreme heat often severely damages yields, but it frequently fails to trigger formal crop failure thresholds, leaving farmers totally without payouts. Plus, there's always the ongoing risk of input hoarding creating local shortages.
Section 5. Farmer-level implications.
Down on the ground, we're seeing this widening divide in how farming operations handle the stress. Smallholders in rain-fed belts bear the absolute brunt of the climate risk. They are heavily exposed with almost zero financial capacity to replant if things go wrong. On the flip side, larger farmers can buffer themselves using existing capital, things like irrigation, storage facilities, and solar pumping, to essentially bypass those diesel price shocks altogether. And this traps so many farmers in this incredibly stressful decision loop, right? First, cheap subsidized urea encourages them to plan for heavy application. But second, highly uncertain rainfall makes that upfront spending super risky. If the rains fail, that whole investment is lost. And third, exorbitant diesel costs mean they can't afford to just pump water to save the crop. It's a vicious cycle.
Section 6. Strategic outlook for the next 4 to 8 weeks and actionable insights.
All right, looking ahead for the next month or two, we are tracking 3 main scenarios. The base case assumes that 92% of the long period average, meaning near normal acreage, but highly elevated yield risks for rain-fed crops. The adverse case models a strengthening El Niño, which would lead to sharp yield losses. And finally, the benign case hopes for a very even spatial distribution of rain, which would result in manageable output. So, what's the actual game plan? Well, farmers in rain-fed areas really need to shift away from water-intensive paddy towards short-duration pulses and millets. Agronomists have to aggressively deploy block-level contingency plans. And the startup ecosystem, they need to step up and build heat index insurance products and hyper-local decision tools. And here's the silver lining. The sheer scale of investment waiting to solve these exact problems is staggering. India has over $2 billion in capital backing more than 1,000 agri-tech startups right now. This includes dedicated, government-backed funds like Agri explicitly earmarked to scale climate-smart solutions. The resources are there. Which brings us to our final big question. This kharif season is the ultimate proving ground. Will these heavily funded tech interventions, combined with our historic cereal stockpiles, actually be enough to protect the agricultural economy from a severely volatile climate? We'll definitely be watching this space closely. Thanks so much for joining this explainer. Stay curious, and we'll catch you next time.